So let me just say at this stage that questions will be very welcome. My comment is that as you pointed out, this approach to organizations is very important, because we know that for many other organizations, including high reliability organization, which might be the case in cybersecurity domain, that learning occurs not through punishment, but through different type of incentives.
Exactly.
And in fact, we do know from literature on organization theory, for example, literature on mistakes in air forces, that it was only 20 years ago when people when organizations such as air forces moved from a blame culture to a more learning culture, that actually there was a reduction in accidents, which was due to the full cooperation of actors involved in the process. So I guess that's a very good call there. And it would be good to see this paper with further empirical analysis of some organizations which failed and some which did succeed, which I think would make it very complete. And I cannot but say that I totally agree with the approach, and I would be super glad to read a version with further empirics about this. But the theory is strong, and I think strongly linked, embedded in organizational theories. And thanks for bringing this to the attention of cybersecurity specialists, because there's a lot to be learned from this domain. So,
yeah, if I may answer,
yeah, you should go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I fully agree with you. Just 2 points. The first one is that I'm always surprised when I'm talking about cybersecurity to see that people do not know the literature on a highly reliable organization, because it's a very classical literature, which is well known, which was empirically tested and with very good results. So why don't we apply to the cybersecurity domain things which are well known in, for example, aviation security for a very long time? So this is always a surprise for me. And the second point is that we've been testing empirically the theory in the academy. We've got a professional thesis which was prepared on this subject, and we've got very interesting results about the behavior of young cadets, which are drilled to security issues, which receive on a yearly basis a strong information of what you should do in case of an incident, etc. We're in the army domain, in the army field, with people who are supposed to follow the rules, etc., etc. And we've got very interesting results because our cadets are like every student. In fact, they make mistakes. Not all of them, but a part of them is making mistakes, obviously, and we would do mistakes, in fact. And they are mostly afraid of sanctions. In the military field, you've got sanctions for every misbehavior. And so in this field of the cybersecurity, people do not really understand the rules. They do not understand what must be done, etc., etc. It's quite complicated. And so when there is an incident, a large part of our cadets just shut down the computer, they go for a walk, and they come back 1 hour later, hoping that when they will switch on the computer, the problem will be solved. And it is not. And so it's very confusing to see that these young officers don't know exactly what to do, and they are because they are afraid of sanctions. And so really we've got very strong empirical tests on what to do, and it's always damaging to see that even if you've got a strong theory and a strong empirical test, the IT experts go on with, no, we must punish, we must make IT rules, etc. And so there is some kind of conspiracy between paranoid engineers and poor lawyers, and they meet together and they produce IT charters which are really very damaging for cybersecurity.
As a social scientist, I cannot but agree with you on this. And thanks for this very inspiring first paper. And glad to know that you have empirics, and I'll be glad to read the paper when you go
I
ahead.
can tell you.
So yeah, it would be amazing. It's now about I know it's fast, but it's about Jean's time because we're already kind of lagging a bit behind the schedule. So Jean should have the privilege of presenter. And thanks again, Didier. So Jean's moment. Jean is sharing content. Everything is going faster than I thought. So you have the minutes. Go ahead, please.
Good evening from Australia. My name is Jean, and I'm going to talk about this paper that I've written on cybersecurity and maritime issues, focusing on the South China Sea and the Philippines. A little background about the Philippines: 333 years under Spain, 55 under American, 3 under Japan. So the so-called independence started in 1946, and now the country is being led by this guy, Rodrigo Duterte, 16th president of the Philippines. Now, why am I talking about him? Well, mainly because the argument of this paper revolves around his new foreign policy approach. So just a little background of the problem: 2 separate attacks linked to China have been found to compromise the country's cybersecurity in 2019. Well, the latest Chinese-related cyber attacks did not take the Philippines by surprise, as both countries have had history of engaging into a hacking war, as seen in 2012 and 2016. The phasing of these cyber attacks raises an alarm. The new attacks in the Philippines came at a time when Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte overtly advocated for a foreign policy that is less dependent on the United States and less hostile of China. Thus, one cannot help but ask China's real intention towards the Southeast Asian country, which is considered to be one of America's strongest allies in the region. The Philippines case study shows the intricacy of responding to cyber attacks and has raised questions concerning what role do shifting political alliances and power relations play in these new attacks. So I used Burton's 3 conceptual models of small state security that focuses on alliances, institutional cooperation, and identity and norms. As the Philippines moves towards a Sino-friendly foreign policy, it is worth analyzing whether these 3 conceptual models will have an impact on the cybersecurity issues that the country is or will be facing, as opposed to larger states. Small states are often power deficient. Not only does this mean that they cannot exert influence over another state, but also they do not have the means to resist larger states' execution of power. To counterbalance the shortcomings, smaller states would often seek alliances with more powerful ones, either through joining the threatening state itself or going against it. The second framework revolves around the idea of multilateralism and transparency within the international institution. Since smaller nations like the Philippines often have weaker military strength, they would often count on joint approaches to international security issues. And finally, the last framework focuses on small states' identity and norm. This model, I believe, is the most personal among the 3, as it relies on how a certain state regards itself. So small states that believe that they are small tend to have foreign policies that are linked to their small identity. Now, let us analyze the Philippine cybersecurity under this lens. The election of Rodrigo Duterte in 2016, however, steered policy, as I've said a while ago, to be more independent. So one that is supposed to protect and advance the interests of the Filipino people while maintaining a cordial relationship with non-traditional diplomatic partners. Though the adjective independent has been construed as stepping away from the United States, also endorsed under the independent foreign policy umbrella is the Philippines' aggressive approach against international institutions such as the United Nations in many occasions. In 2016, Philippine President Duterte has threatened to withdraw the Philippines from the UN in light of his war on drugs. And the Philippines also pulled out of the Rome Statute in 2019, the treaty that established the International Criminal Court after the announcement that the country would be examined for the deaths linked to the anti-narcotics campaign. The Philippines' dismissal of international law could be assumed as rebranding the country's political identity and norms. So being a small state, the Philippines has utilized its membership with the UN for its political leverage in various diplomatic issues, such as the issue in South China Sea. While perpetrators could come from various states surrounding South China Sea, for example, Vietnam, a huge majority of hacktivism and cyber espionage appear to originate from China. The recent cyber attacks resonate the 2012 cyber conflict between China and the Philippines, where hackers from two nations have defaced each other's government websites, embellishing the clashing claims of the two nations over Scarborough Shoal or Hualien Island. Another series of hacking happened in 2016 at the Philippines' victory at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, where the Chinese hackers extracted confidential information from the websites of the Philippines Department of Justice. Well, as I've said a while ago, these Chinese-related attacks in the Philippines are not new. The interesting part about this cyber attack is its timing, as they appear to be in synchrony with the Philippine president's first aggressive announcement towards China. The recent cyber attack also materialized at a time when the Philippines' desire to modernize its security strategies became more apparent. Most of these strategies are closely related to the South China Sea dispute, including signing an agreement with another Southeast Asian country, Indonesia, concerning the overlapping EEZ, or Exclusive Economic Zone. So the Philippines' changing alliance, norms, identities, and antagonistic approach towards international institutions could also have tremendous effect on the country's foreign and domestic policies. The upsurge of Chinese-related cyber attacks in the Philippines can be viewed as two things. First, as a frantic move from China to retrieve information from the Philippines to ensure that the Duterte's pro-China rhetorics have actual laws behind it. And secondly, as a proof that in the world of cyber attacks, China appears to have the upper hand. Being a small state and isolating itself away from international institutions, the Philippines would have no political, diplomatic, and economic tools to respond to massive cyber attacks from any big nations, including China. Thus, moving away from the UN could undermine the Philippines' case against China regarding territorial dispute. And way forward, which is my last slide, the positive developments that we have seen in recent years through 3 legislations in the Philippines are not enough. The complications that the Philippines is facing in the field demonstrate the common problems that small states, not only the Philippines, face in the area of security policy. Aside from the lack of political will and budget restrictions, small states are often find themselves in between a collision between two giant rocks. As the Philippines' small state security strategies have been evolving, its cybersecurity risk also increases. Building new diplomatic relationships with non-traditional partners like China is something to be lauded, but closing doors in traditional allies such as the United States and burning bridges with the United Nations will not serve the Philippines well, particularly since the country has a territorial dispute with China. It is about time that small states, leaders like President Duterte, reconsider his strategy without destabilizing the already established relationship with China. While achieving a decent diplomatic balance between US and China might not be an easy task, but with new diplomatic ties with China and traditional alliance with the United States and the other, the Philippines, among many other nations, is in a good position to achieve these now more than ever. Thank you.
Thanks, Jin. It was very interesting to see this different, at least from a European point of view, approach to the problem. And I will ask any of the panelists and attendees if they have questions, comments, dare to say critiques to what has been just said.
May I ask something?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, it's very. I think it's very interesting. The presentation is really very interesting because the question of how countries can build alone or in alliance their cybersecurity policy is very interesting. And so I understand the idea of a small country who is trying to build its cybersecurity policy, but what do you call a small country? What is a small country in cybersecurity issues and a middle and a big country? Where is the border between the two?
Well, I distinguished the two, or I differentiated the two based on their impact regionally. If if a country has, let's say, the Philippines, for example, is part of an ASEAN Association of Southeast Asian Nation, which is and it's not I would say one of the dominant countries that have been the voice of ASEAN. So that's how I define small country. It's not because it's a small country by size, because there are smaller countries by size, such as Samoa, other Pacific Islands, and Melanesian, but also it goes beyond the physical representation of size, but on how they are represented in international arena, which, as we know, we're the Philippines, as I've said a while ago, just pulled out of the Rome Statute, the treaty that established the International Criminal Court, and we're not part of any influential organization. We're not even part of G20 or such. So that's how I define small country.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, time is running fast. Let me just say that as I thank Didier for bringing organization theory into this panel, let me thank Jean for bringing IR theory into this panel, which is a very important contribution. And let me say that as a person who does IR, it seems to me that what emerges is that domestic sources of foreign policy be very strong, even for small states, which is an important finding, as a lot of literature has been argued that small state being constrained in an anarchic international system, they have to do something which will be determined by their position in the international system. And what you seem to argue is that actually domestic factors do play a huge role, especially in later years with the Duterte presidency. And this was a comment. I will not have you replying because I think I'm right on this. And I'm also in charge of keeping everything in time. So Marzio Di Feo, thanks Jean again. Marzio Di Feo, can you share your screen and start your presentation?
Yeah. Everybody, I'm very happy to be here. My name is Marzio Di Feo. I'm going to present my paper, which focuses on the relation between two concepts, which are the first one is complexity of cyber war on war and cyberspace as a multiplier effect of complexity for war phenomenon. The other one is useful fiction. I have to make a confession. I will be very speculative. I will try to recall some images from the ancient past and from some military strategies. This is the first images. This is a wooden horse. This passage is from the Art of War of Machiavelli, where he described how the Jackson and the ancient practiced to cope with war, in this case, for riding. Here I want to underline two main points, which are at the basis of my paper. The first one is, as I say, the theoretical framework of complexity related to war phenomenon. Now the second confession, because I refer to war phenomenon as objects which can shape the war ecosystem and not as the consequences of war phenomenon. This helps me to avoid the debate about cyber war, in particular the reference of Thomas Field, because we will see in a few slides, I will refer to Clausewitz as guiding spirit of my paper. The second theoretical framework is about fictional intelligence, which was coined by Peter Singer and August Cole, and this it is all it's nothing new. It is the capacity to use old-fashioned communication style for new research and analysis. For instance, let's think about science fiction. Here, this is the current situation. So modern conflict scenarios push battlefield out of geographical fronts, as we have already seen. The cyberspace and cyber attack increase the unpredictability of war phenomena because due to the attribution problem, but also for the capacity of the adversary to act in the shadow. Moreover, humans, to cope with this unpredictability, have to try to understand and relate with machines. To recall another images in his lovely book of Christopher Coker, he calls this transformation of a warrior as warrior gigs. Warriors have to understand much more cyberspace environment and try to shape and to adapt the way to conduct operation in cyberspace. Here, sorry for that, there is another. I hope to put it in this concept of virtuality from James Berderian. So it's not just the capacity to use virtual reality, but also the ability to collapse distance and on space side and on temporal aspects from here and far, and also from fact and fiction. So in future warfare, we have to consider all these capabilities, all these peculiarities of future battlefield. Here there is Clausewitz, is our guiding spirit of the presentation. I used the Bayek, a very famous paper about nonlinearity and unpredictability of war. In particular, the unpredictability in Clausewitz comes from three main aspects, which is interaction, friction, and chance. Interaction is the opposing wheels, so the interaction between us and our enemy. The friction could be interpreted as the entropy principle in Clausewitz, calling way the second law of thermodynamics, which is the status of the disorder of war as a system. So the tendency in the trend in war phenomenon to be much more disordered. The last point is chance. A chance to recall another image is like war is like playing cards. So in interaction between us and our adversary, we have to take into account so many factors which would increase the unpredictability of war, of our interaction. In this view, cyberspace and cyber environment is like a multiplier effect of all this, because we have, as I said, the attribution problem, but we have also the asymmetrical confrontation between David and Goliath, and the capacity of David to use almost the same weapons and of Goliath. To cope with this unpredictability, military strategists and policymakers have developed and used computer simulation and wargaming. It's very interesting to highlight how, and useful for this presentation, of how wargaming was developed in combination with technological evolution. So we have a computer simulation, now we have virtual reality, and we have also the capacity to perceive the war phenomenon. And at the same time, wargaming is also a scientific method, of course, in order to support decision makers, but also military strategies to prepare and conduct operations. In this way, useful fiction could contribute to cyber exercises scenario as the capacity to produce an appropriate narrative on the training itself. For instance, the training also as a strategic could be put in a strategic narrative, in a strategic framework. Let's think, for instance, about the exercises in Russia or in the Arctic, but also in cyberspace, as a tool to and an instrument to show to the enemy or to the adversary your capacity and to continue on a strategic culture or a strategic framework of a country. As I said at the beginning of my presentation, fictional intelligence is not new. I want to refer to two of my favorite science fiction writers, Philippe Dick and John Le Carré, much more spy story writer. Just to go to the conclusion. Fictional intelligence could be used for two important elements. It could increase the capacity to perceive and to feel the effects of the state of research through imagined words or through the use of various fields of research in a military strategy. And on the other side, it could also induce some emotional connection. Let's think, for instance, about commercial, or let's think, for instance, about science fiction itself. It could have, in this way, persuasive abilities, and at the same time, it could use the capacity and the critical thinking from various fields of research to future threats. So, fictional intelligence could be used in cyber exercises scenarios, also to test or develop new hypotheses, or at the same time to try to predict future threats, but starting from reality. So one thing important for fictional intelligence is to be extremely scientifically rigorous and be based on the rigor of analytical and scientific rigor of the specific field of application.
Marzio, can you get to conclusion, please?
Yes. Here you can find two examples, just not to be too much theoretical. The first one is the recent news about the recruitment by the French army of a red team of science fiction writers. The second one is a project developed by the Atlantic Council. The name is the Art of Future Warfare, which try to crowdsource from various fields of research and approaches to depict the future of warfare. And here I hope he will forgive me. I quote just General Fuller to how to establishing a scientific method for war could help to predict future events. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So very briefly, let me open the floor for questions or comments. I would like you to stick to very, very short remarks, please, so that we give Anna later on the same symmetrical treatment. Okay, I shall use the privilege of the chair just to say that there is very, very rich presentations. I guess there's perhaps more than one paper here. And my only suggestion would be to well, either to write a book, which is always a good thing, or to come up with a slightly more streamlined approach to designing this presentation and paper, because I think this richness can be a bit overwhelming at times. And while I'm happy that I've been learning a lot through this, maybe it's just too much for a single paper. That might be why we're all overwhelmed. So thank you, Marzio. I hope we now can move to Anna's presentation, and I hope she can share a screen while we wait. Just a paper is called Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Between Cybersecurity and Policymaking.
As soon as I can share.
Yeah, sure. We wait for our host to, as efficiently as it's done up to now, be able to do that. I see the presentations coming up. So Anna, you still have 10 minutes. And
all right. So I'll be very, very brief. I'll try. So this presentation is focused on critical information infrastructure protection, and in particular in trying to highlight some interdisciplinary points between the perspective of cybersecurity, traditional cybersecurity, and the policymaking aspect of critical infrastructure protection. So at first, we must define critical information infrastructure, what it is. And there is no single shared definition, but this is one of my favorites, because it is it is very, very expansive, and it includes all interconnected information systems and networks that are connected to or that could potentially disrupt critical infrastructure, the physical world, the well-being of citizens, the health, safety, and general security of the public. So some examples of CII are ICTs that are connected to critical infrastructures, such as SCADA systems and industrial control systems in general. Networks such as the internet in general, which is, as I said, extremely wide as a definition, but it definitely fits, as it includes all the services and the systems that depend on the internet for proper functioning, and physical components such as submarine cables for internet transmission, and data centers, and all the physical infrastructure that allows cyberspace to function properly. So what defines a critical information infrastructure is not the technology itself that it is made of, but the critical processes that depend on it, or that could be vulnerable in case the infrastructure itself is were to be targeted. So the field of critical information infrastructure protection is intrinsically interdisciplinary, because it depends on a series of steps that cannot be separated both from cybersecurity and from policymaking and policy analysis. So, for instance, the development of informed estimates on potential threats that cannot be done without deep and accurate knowledge of the cybersecurity landscape. The individuation of adequate responses and preventative measures, that is both the policymaker's job and also the cybersecurity's most proper, most specific arena, and the proposal, application, and execution of relevant strategies, which is, of course, dependent on the policymakers' willingness to delve into these topics and create strategies and execute strategies that can actually fit with the experts' modeling. So interdisciplinarity requires CIIP to be both cybersecurity in a way and part of political science. So the first question is it cybersecurity? Is it part of cybersecurity? And what I found is that most fundamental assumptions in cybersecurity hold true in the field of critical information infrastructure protection. So of course, the weakest link approach, so the need to protect all components in a process, especially the ones that are less maybe less prominent, maybe maybe older, maybe not as well known, and that therefore can be considered more at risk. Then the all hazards approach, which is basically the weakest link approach, but directed to all the range of possible potential attackers and potential threats that are information infrastructure is subject to. So the need to not only focus on the most typical threats, on the most well-known ones, but also to understand that that extreme cases are rare but always possible. So they cannot be discounted as completely outlandish. Then the difficulty in putting together security, trust, and consistency, as of course security is a value for both users and systems, but users also value the ability to trust their systems, the ability to hopefully do their jobs, basically whatever they might be, use all their ICGs with the ability to trust them, to trust their security, and to follow consistent procedures. And so the need, on the other hand, so the need to uphold consistent procedures in order to guarantee that users' trust in systems is not misplaced. Another important point is the prevalence, the absolute prevalence of consistency over perfection. So the search for perfection in security practices is counterproductive. It leads to frustrated users that cannot completely fulfill the strictest requirements, and that inevitably will fail at upholding the most sophisticated policies. And that, on the other hand, could do much better in terms of overall security if they were able to implement consistently best practices and the kind of security measures that allowed for a protection in terms of most likely scenarios and not necessarily worst case scenarios. And then finally, the fact that it is impossible to conceptualize a scenario of complete success, as it is substantially impossible to prepare for all potential threats, to actively counteract all potential attacks. And so the need to explain to the user and to the system stakeholders that whatever measures the administrator will enact, whatever policies will be chosen, it is always, in any case, it is always still possible to be attacked and not to be prepared for some kind of potential attack. And these constants apply not only at the logic layer, at the layer of code, but also at the physical one. So it is important to secure both code and the infrastructure on which it runs, that allows it to run, in order to somehow not betray the weakest link principle, because it is useless to focus too much on code if the infrastructure itself is completely or mostly or partly vulnerable. And so how is CIIP political? There are three main branches in this sense. Issue prioritization, meaning basically the fact that policymakers must make their choice of priorities when protecting infrastructure, and also when deciding whether to invest in infrastructure protection or other potential areas. So in this case, it is important to highlight the complexity of democratic discourse regarding infrastructure protection. Then public coordination, which is necessary in a field that involves multiple public, private, mixed actors, and that is nevertheless this critical for citizens and for the economy and society. And finally, national security, which is a framing justified by the adoption of cyberspace as the fifth military domain, and therefore a valid part of any national security strategy. Focusing on CII and geopolitics, of course, it is linked to sovereignty because it connects cyberspace to actual geopolitical reality.
Anna, can you get towards conclusions?
Yes, I will try. I will try to rush it through. Infrastructure ownership is the first critical point, as it translates to political pressure. It translates to even in the digital world, in the digital sense. And a second point is supply chains, which are one of the most vulnerable parts of this ecosystem, of any CII ecosystem, because attacking the top of them will have cascade effects on all of them. And it is possible to target CIIs themselves, either through cyber attack or physically, and this will substantially weaponize them and make them another prime target for geopolitical developments. And I will skip the examples as we are short on time and go straight to regulation, which is the last somehow political branch regarding critical information infrastructure protection, and where it is very, very hard to envision global regulatory protection schemes, because the biggest sectors, the most important ones, are also generally the ones that benefit the most from an unregulated landscape, where they have more freedom to enact their offensive capabilities. So generally, even the European Union, with its very proactive stance, can do little, because its developments are generally defensive and local, but they cannot be too intense as to in order to not to isolate European netizens from the rest of the world in a bubble of extreme protective measures that would counteract the original purpose of CIIP. And in the end, even the steps that have been taken, such as the declaration by NATO in 2019 that Article 5 can be triggered by a cyber attack, are not resolutive, are not don't settle the actual issue at hand, because the complexity introduced by cyber attacks, especially by their interaction with critical infrastructures, is a very very complex topic, especially in the potential scenario of a hybrid conflict, as it would be a very easy, very effective way to target civilians, and a way that would be very difficult to counteract with current geopolitical and political measures. And so, as a way forward, I would propose, like everyone, basically a stricter collaboration with between policymakers, industry stakeholders, and academia. But these must not only happen at the at the technical level, well, where of course the experts, yes, the expertise of technical personnel must be integrated, but also at the stage of agenda setting, of policy agenda setting, because if critical infrastructure issues are seen as background issues or less important, and they are not understood by citizens and policymakers, their relevance can be overlooked, and in that case, all technical information is basically rendered useless. So I thank you, and I thank my institutions that allow me to do my my work, and I'll just stop. Hopefully, I fill the minutes correctly.
This was a great presentation, and although we also broke the boundaries of time, and I see that my co-chair and organizer Luigi Martino is pushing me, I would ask anyone if they have questions for Anna, who really gave us a good finale for this subsection. So there's no immediate questions. I'm sure the teams raised very many. I think my only point here is to suggest another great paper, as in the case of Marzio. I guess my only point would be the possibly many papers in one, which is a good thing because it's always good to have extra papers around. And I guess that would facilitate even getting to the point, which is the last point you make, which is very, very important about what solutions there are here. And my only point here would be that it's not either or. It's not either national security or policy making, or cybersecurity or policy making. Rather, the point you make, and I think that can be further value to a title and abstract, perhaps, is actually that you should consider all these activities as policy making, with all the problems connected to creation of complex governance infrastructures or architectural institutional architectures. So I guess policy making comes before the cybersecurity. In a sense, this cybersecurity is a part of it, rather than an alternative to it. Although it's often seen as that, and I agree with your points that you made. So again, thanks. And I think I've done a decent job myself with 6 minutes delay. So I'll invite Luigi Martino to take over the session here. I thank Anna, Didier, Jen, and Marzio in random order here. I see Luigi is here. It's good to have you here, and you'll, I'm sure, do better than me, and you have 54 minutes, which I left you with.
Thank you very much, Francesco, because you know that you are my master, because I studied with you, and then you represent my reference point in this study. And thank you. It's a very honor to have you on board on ITASEC, and I hope that next year we can organize together this special track again, and maybe we can structure the topic of a social and political issue on cybersecurity at a very high level. And thank you again, Francesco. Thank you very much. Grazie. And I don't know, guys, if you want to have a 5 minutes of break. I don't know. If you want, we can have 5 minutes, and then we can restart in 5 minutes. Okay, Lior, you are here because I have 3 paper givers: Lior Tabansky, Alessia Boi, Paolo Spagnoletti, Federica Ceci, Andrea Salvi. Are you here, guys?
Yes, yeah, I'll be the presenter for the last paper you mentioned.
Okay, Andrea Salvi, Lior, it's here, and Alessia. Oh, okay. Can we have 3 minutes of break? Okay. Excellent. Okay, guys. Then we can start with the final section with the presentation of the papers. I have 3 papers. The first one is the author. It's Lior Tabansky, mind the gap Western military theory of victory versus cyber attack. And then the second one is written by Alessia Boi, a comparative analysis of cyber intelligence, the Italian case. And the last but not least is the authors are Paolo Spagnoletti, Federica Ceci, Andrea Salvi, and Andrea will be the speaker of this paper, which is entitled Adversarial Evolution, Competing Dynamics and Reactive Institutional Forms in Financial Services Ecosystems. Then Lior, the floor, the microphone, it's yours. Please introduce your paper, and maybe I can collect questions, or maybe I can give you any inputs or feedback. Please, Lior.
Thank you, Luigi. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm talking about a rather strange situation that I have been working on from my dissertation and further on. I have a doctorate in political science, and this paper is based on my dissertation. So we have devised quite a good security organization in the West in the last many decades, but for direct cyber attacks on homeland, the existing organization has failed, and in particular the militaries has failed. Destructive direct cyber attacks don't have to be something like Stuxnet. We have huge epidemics of ransomware that only increases. It is perceived as criminal, but still these are destructive or disruptive attacks that come from the outside of the country and cause direct damage. This is a situation for which we have built elaborate institutions, and they seem not to be working. The current theory of victory is that someone in the Department of Defense usually can understand what's going on, collect some intelligence on what's going on, who wants to do harm, and detect when the hostilities begin. And then the armed forces, their mission is to deny the enemy from reaching the homeland and combat to prevent the enemies from reaching their goals. First and foremost, to prevent harm to civilians, to the homeland. In practice, intelligence is done by commercial entities, usually, but not usually, mostly Americans, CrowdStrike, FireEye, and so on. You can count maybe on two hands the number of government or national intelligence agencies who have similar capabilities. And combat is even worse. We see in numerous published cases from I don't know, from the Sony Pictures Entertainment hack in 2014 to ransomware, that combat is not done by any government entity. The enemy simply, adversaries, attackers, simply reach out the targets without any government or national force to overcome. So those who do the combat in practice are all sorts of IT security companies, which is a strange situation where the private sector is expected to provide the functions that the national governments usually do. Overall, skipping a lot of theoretical background, this can result in a revolution in military affairs, in what we call revolution in military affairs, when defense capabilities are rendered obsolete. What you thought is a good enough or superior capability meets a war, meets an adversary, and to surprise of most, including the attackers, the defenders in this case are not able to prevent the damage, and the attackers achieve overwhelming victory. Now, of course, there are a lot of question marks and differences, but this is a plausible thing that we sort of take for granted. We see it also in the relation to the previous paper in critical infrastructure protection, and I'll get to this in a minute. Now, the main argument is that the possibilities, the potential, and also the empirical evidence is that with cyber technologies, which are not going back, the direct attacks on homeland increase. From your personal documents being held for ransom to entire enterprises and municipalities, and as in the US, being disrupted and not able to provide services to citizens, and up to very elaborate and sophisticated things such as Stuxnet and other disrupting events. The defenses that we have, all the traditional kinetic forces and the cyber forces that the militaries have, are not performing any nearly no defense functions. They definitely protect their own warfighting capabilities. They want to and perhaps succeed in carrying out offensive operations against adversaries, also creating capabilities and using them to collect intelligence. But when we think about who is supposed to protect your city or your town or your home from North Korean, Russian, or any other bad guys who use cyber attacks for partially political motives, then there is a big dissonance. A common person would expect the government and the militaries to do this. However, the militaries usually think otherwise and explain with a lot of logic that this is not their duty, and anyway, they cannot do it because there are other important considerations to think about. So this is the core of the problem, which is there almost for 3 decades now, since the first public document on American recognition of critical infrastructure protection in '91. There was a lot of, and still is a lot of debate, a lot of attempts. For now, what seems to be working until now is, in my view, insufficient. So defense military organizations, new or old, they are not interested really in defense, in protection of the citizens. The law enforcement organizations are not enough. They usually can only act after the damage has occurred, and are very limited in capabilities for many good reasons to prevent the damage from occurring. And what we see, the main area of activity is all sorts of critical infrastructure protection initiatives and agencies in France, in Israel, and these agencies are, of course, doing very good work, but when you compare their resources and their legal framework and their capabilities with the common sense that cyber is perhaps one of the greatest or tier 1 threat, we still have the same problem that I started with. We as nations allocate significant amount of the budgets for security purposes, but the existing organizations fail. They fail or evade this mission, and no amount of technical expertise or superior code on new devices will ever overcome or solve this problem. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I will stop at this stage. I think this is enough for this short session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lior, for this very impressive research, but in particular for your contribution on this topic, because it's quite interesting to receive this contribution about how it's possible to assess whole rules, for instance, for new games. Then this is the main problem. Then I don't know if we have some questions from the chat or the, I don't know, Is there any questions? No? Then maybe the question could be, in your opinion, is possible to use the same approach, the same analytical approach to conduct comparative analysis, not only with the democratic countries, but also with the non-democratic countries? In your opinion, how the Western approach, but the Westphalian approach in particular, is possible to have a comparative analysis between Western countries, democratic countries, and non-democratic countries? Is the same situation or not?
Yes, I think overall it's the same. However, the threat perspective of the non-democratic countries is very different. First of all, they perceive to be vastly inferior to the US and its allies in conventional terms. Second, the threat of information or subversion is much more significant for them, even if we take into account the American concerns since 2016. So it's a different situation, and I'm pretty sure that they too, from what I understand, are vastly not satisfied with their state of security relative to the threats that they expect to intensify.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Lior. I don't know if you wanted to add some points, or have you any remarks or not? You want to? Okay, thank you very much. And then indeed you received the review, no, the suggestions and the revision from the reviews. And then thank you very much. The next speaker, the next author is Alessia Boi, with a paper entitled Comparative Analysis of Cyber Intelligence, the Italian Case. Alessia, welcome on board.
Good afternoon to everybody. I'm just asking if it's working properly because I had some technical issues. So good afternoon to everybody. As introduced by the Professor Luigi Martino, I'm here to present my paper on comparative analysis of cyber intelligence, mostly focused on the Italian case. I should say that this is a paper, a subject on what I'm working for right now, more than 1 year, because it's a subject topic that I brought from my educational path. I graduated at the Italian Military Academy in Turin on this subject. So I decided for this occasion to deepen more and start to compare our situation, our reality with others. So for the beginning, I would like to start from what is happening and what turned the table of the traditional information system. Mostly the coming up of the cyberspace in our life and in the worldwide scenario create a real space revolution, rather the most effective one that we ever faced during our histories. And this space revolution has brought mostly new enemy and new threats that couldn't be more asymmetric, and we never faced such asymmetric threats, because are threats that are really rapid, hybrid, and from where we don't know where coming from. And as I wrote in these slides, the new enemies that our state and our information system is faced are enemy that the most of the time is anonymous, we don't know, and the attribution of these threats is one of the most challenges, problems that is addressed to our states. And so these new features call for our state for new strategies that needs to be applied to this new domain, the cyberspace, that is existing like for a few decades now, but officially was recognized by NATO only in the 2016 during the Warsaw Summit, where it was identified as the 5th domain. But it's not just a traditional domain, because we can consider like a transversal domain, because it includes also all the 4 traditional ones recognized till that time. And so this space revolution highlight, and we can say create institutional gap that all the states faced. It's not just a matter of Italy, Europe, all the states at the beginning faced. The difference, I would say, that is that some states tried and filled this institutional gap or just use it to their advantage, and some others are still rushing to fill that. And so just at the beginning, I would like to highlight how Italy at the beginning faced this problem of the institutional gap. Institutional gap that worldwide was filled by not stateful actor. For the first time in our history, official domain is ruled and led by not state actors. And so about that, Italy react, updating our legislations. That was for sure priority, and was the first turning point was in the 2007 with the law number 124 that update all the information system, not only related to cyber, ruled what is about the classification of documents, but most important, create this Dipartimento per l'Informazione e la Sicurezza that started to create, thanks to this, a culture on cybersecurity and cyber intelligence. Later on, in the 2018, we had another turning point in the cyber strategy of our country, because was finally delivered the national plan for national cyber protection and cybersecurity. Here you can see the 6 points that were inserted in this strategy that were perfectly fitted inside the most broader strategy of NATO, of which Italy is part of that. That highlights 5 strategic initiatives that I insert in this slide, but mostly allowed to apply the Article 5 at the cyber threat that I heard in the previous speech was already mentioned. For sure is not enough, is not this resolution of all the problem that the space revolution relating to cyberspace brought up, but still is a big turning point, especially if we thought about the threat that Estonia faced in 2007, for which NATO was not able to face and to help Estonia in that moment, because there was not yet the application of the Article 5. But to understand better the situation in Italy of our information system, or in general in NATO, I thought that was important to conduct a comparative analysis with another country. That could be different country, first Israel, India, Russia, but I decided, because I had to decide it because of short, is a paper, so I didn't have too much space to compare with all these countries that for sure are bringing up best practice and best case to analyze. I decided to go to the Far East with China. I decided to analyze China, even if it's I could say diametral opposite kind of state respect to Italy. First is like not democratic country, where the power is centralized, so there is less bureaucracy than in a country like Italy is famous for, I could say. And I analyze which are the features that give to China the power that has in cyberspace, and how they can have an effectively cyber intelligence that is working really good and quite too perfect. So first feature is for sure the centralized power that allows to move fast in a domain like cyber that is continually evolving and changing. And so this gives the fastness that in cyberspace is needed, and that is paralyzing the country as Italy, but in general, I would say Europe. And for that was like a solution that was founded by different analysts, but also I heard today during the presentation of different panel by Roberto Viola, the head of the Digital Connect of the European Commission, address the importance of create a national center of in Italy of cyber expertise, because this could give the fastness of a country, a democratic country, to react in the short time in the cyberspace. The second point is for sure the millennial of culture of security in China, that put the base in the philosophy of Sun Tzu, where every citizen is pushed to contribute in the information system and to help the country to face different threats and problems. The third is I would say the highest point of the cyber intelligence, the Chinese cyber intelligence, is that they were able to create an harmonious substrate of integration between the state actor and not state actors. And here, I would say that stay the secret, the perfect recipe for an efficient cyber intelligence structure. Because was able to connect billions of information coming from institutions, non-state actor, companies, and different actors. And to close this analysis, the Minister of State Security, the MSS, dedicate just to the cyberspace more than 30 offices just on these problems and threats. So they put a lot of attention in that. And to conclude this part on China, I analyze yes, I will go really fast. How they can integrate the different state and state actors. For a long time was thinking that the reason was a mosaic theory to connect all the pieces of information. With the time, it came up that it could be impossible, even if cyber helps to collect information, but rather, if not now, in the future, the telecommunication companies will have a really important role of node between to fill this institutional gap about what I was speaking before. To conclude my paper, I analyze also the step forward that Italy and NATO made, because we made some step forwards that it's really important. Firstly, I can speak about the Center of Cooperative Excellence for Computer Defense, organized by NATO in Estonia, where different countries participate and share knowledge about that, and Italy is part of that. Here I insert also the best practice of USA with the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center. That is a center ad hoc for trying to connect and fill this institutional gap, connecting stateful and not stateful actors. And at the end, Italian Pride and N7, the multinational experiment 7, for which Italy was the leader of this NATO exercise, where there was an exercise to help and give the tool to decision making of different countries to address the cyber threat and apply the cyber norms that right now is up to. To conclude, a center for which I would say we should be really proud in our country is the Telecommunication School of Armed Forces in Chiavari. That is an excellent center for what is really important, and where our army and national force can exercise themselves through a national virtual polygon, and for where they experiment new tactics. To conclude, I would say that for now, what the cyber intelligence needs to look forward, and all the information system of our country, especially Italy and Europe, should look forward, is to improve the multidimensionality, horizontal between non-state actor and state actual actors, and also vertical multidimensionality between country and other country by sharing information. So exercise like the MS7 can be really improving this. And so thank you for your attention. I hope that I didn't go too long, and Thanks.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Alessia, for your presentation. I don't know if we have any questions from the chat or the attendees. Have you any question? No? Excellent. Just to share with you my few advices or recommendations, if you want. It's two main advices. The first one, I think that it will be very useful if you, in the next research, you can focalize your attention on few case studies in order to collect I'd say empirical evidences or other, in order to focalize your attention. Okay, then this is just my first recommendation, to select few case studies, one or two at maximum. Yes, but also you find appropriate unit of analysis maybe, and the variables, etc., and then you compare differences and also similarities. Then the second advice, it's about methodology. Then you, in my opinion, you have to finalize it, to focalize your attention on a specific research design, and then to choose which kind of a methodology you would like to use. For instance, qualitative or quantitative level, in order to conduct your research, to address your main research question. But thank you very much, because I appreciate your paper, and it's very important to receive this kind of analysis for ITASEC, and in particular for this special track that we organized for the first time on ITASEC about social and political issue, and also at the same time because we had the opportunity to understand the Italian posture on this cyber intelligence in particular concept. And thank you very much, Alessia. I don't know if you have any remarks or any additional.
No, thank you for the advice that are always really accepted and helpful. And I just would like, thanks to the opportunity to present this paper, and I leave the floor to the next paper.
Thank you so much, Alessia. Then the last but not least paper giver is Andrea Salvi, which presents a paper entitled Adversarial Evolution, Competing Dynamics and Reactive Institutional Forms in Financial Services Ecosystem, which the authors are Paolo Spagnoletti, Federica Ceci, and Andrea Salvi. Andrea, yes, you have 10 minutes or 12 minutes, it depends. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for having me here, even more so. So I'm presenting the work I've been doing with my co-authors, Paolo Spagnoletti and Federica Ceci, on adversarial evolution that will analyze, as the title suggests, the dynamics of competition between actors in the financial services ecosystem. Now, the research context in which our work found its roots is that of financial cybercrimes and ecosystem formation, broadly speaking. Try to bridge those two branch of literatures. So as far as financial cybercrime goes, we define that as profit-driven forms of crime that, through a variety of vectors, aim at misappropriating value through a malicious use of some forms of digital technologies. Now, the interesting thing from a research standpoint is that the combination of these TTPs, as we call it in the more technical side, varies quite a lot over time and on other variables such as targets, sectors, and so on. This is what some authors have been labeling as outlaw innovation. So a recombination of techniques and way to exploit digital technologies that produces new forms of cybercrime and a new configuration of actors entirely. On the other side, what banks and other sort of financial institutions has to do to protect their environment and even more so customers from cybercrime is to come together into other institutional arrangement that include a variety of actors depending again on the sector and on some specific elements and different levels, so state level, private, but also strategic actor and tactical and operational actors, with some, and we included some mentions of the most relevant literature in here. Now, one of our main proposition is that one who looks into the activity of cybercriminal, well, we should really consider something that is mostly overlooked when we focus on the actual element of attacks. That is, we mainly look at those that are the primary activities of cyber criminals and cybercrime groups and so on. That is the actual attack. So their process that is normally included in kill chain model and so on of discovery of vulnerability, exploiting it, delivering a payload, and then delivering the actual, and then unleashing the actual attack. Well, what some author argued is that the economics behind cybercrime is extremely relevant to explain how cybercrime works, and even more so to combat it properly. One of our sort of main proposition then is that we need to look at those elements that are behind the actual kill chain that we can observe up here to fully understand how it unfolds. So the information sharing of malicious actors, the institutional forms that malicious actors take in order to get to the final step, that is that of primary activities. Now, our research design essentially revolves around the idea that cybercrime and security operations in the sort of bright side of financial services ecosystems are conflicting rather than complementary practices. And in a way, they both play, their conflict is what drives to some extent the change in digital system ecosystem formation and evolution. So their mutual influence, the mutual influence of conflicting and warring parties bring to an organizational morphing in this ecosystem as a whole. So in the broader project, we address two main research questions, that is how data, technology, and actor configuration co-evolve in cybersecurity, cybercrime, and SecOps, and how cybercrime and SecOps influence the ecosystem formation and evolution. And in this brief contribution in particular, we do elaborate a conceptual model to explain how the two parties influence one another and how they sort of push for innovation in the ecosystem, and present a brief illustrated case on Italy on a 5-step model from the 90s, showing the paired configuration of actors along the different institutional form they took. Now, what we know so far from the literature on ecosystem is that most of the time, changes are brought into the ecosystem by an external stimulus, by external stimuli. That could be technological innovation, in changing obsolescence of security protocols. So kind of exogenous stimulus that brings the shift the market condition. Actors will therefore adjust their value generating path to keep extracting value from the ecosystem they're in, and they will eventually come together into institutional forms that will shape the ecosystem where they exist and sort of extract value from. If new actors join the ecosystem that with some value-driven interest of some sort, they may choose to join one of the configuration, and some others, given the change in their value-seeking behavior, may want to opt out. And the morphing in this case take place, according to the literature, into three main categories. That is the configuration of the actors, so what form they take, the technology they use, the technological functionalities behind their functioning and behind their operations, and data in terms of types and formats. What we propose here is, and this is kind of our conceptual model in brief, is that it's not only an exogenous change that brings the actors to change their value generating path, but really there could be a shift in competitive conditions within the ecosystem itself. And we want to frame that as a conflicting change of competitive conditions with what we call adversaries to a certain degree. So in this paper in particular, we focus on the financial services ecosystem, looking at those institutions who sort of strive for appropriation of value, so financial institutions, banks, and so on, and those who seek misappropriation of values, as we discussed before, so cyber criminals. The conceptual model briefly states that the competition, the conflict meeting on the virtual battlefield to a certain degree generates a feedback at the SACOP level of the bright or dark side of the ecosystem that will trigger an adjustment in the value-driven path of the actors. And the digital service ecosystem will adjust accordingly to meet the shift in both in market condition and competitive conditions. So as the graph shows, the first change, this one here, shows how the conflict between these two elements, so bright and dark actors in the ecosystem, triggers a change that push again a change in competitive condition that will eventually resolve into a full mutation of the ecosystem itself. Now, oh yeah, there we go. We have the numbers. Sorry for that. Zooming in a particular step of our model instantiated in a practical case, we may mention the case of the EU Off-to-Send platform, an initiative by the Italian Polizia Postale for tracking essentially financial cyber crimes and frauds, and the counterpart that we identified in our model, which I will show you in a minute, that is the one of online black markets. So two institutional forms whereby actors, two configuration of actors to better say, whereby actors, participants of the ecosystem come together to follow their value generating path. And we, in the paper, we instantiate the different configuration of data that are used by the two institutional forms and the technology they make use of. And also, most importantly, which actors board in or bandwagon to sort of join that particular institutional arrangements, and which one opt out or opt in depending on the changes in market and competitive conditions. And what we argue is that the interaction, again, between these two conflicting sides leads to full shift in the ecosystem as a whole. Another exemplification of what we did is sort of at a higher level is depicted here in this five-step model for each pair of bright and dark side institutional forms, where the whole evolution in the period of time from the starting of 2000 to after 2015 is shown, whereby to each temporal phase, we have a different configuration of actor, a different use of data, and different technological capability that are used by the actor involved that in some way characterize the whole ecosystem. The one we zoomed upon here is the one here on online black market and cryptocurrency. So Of course, given the time constraints, I'm not mentioning the full technological sort of description of the two aspects. But we can see how actors, data, and technologies that are used change across the different steps. And partially due to, well, again, as I mentioned before, structural changes, so obsolescence of technologies and so on, but also due to the fact that these institutional forms are born in principle as a reactive measure to their counterpart, to meet the security challenge that the counterpart poses. Now, before concluding, we have some further empirical evidence based on what are the current trends, right, to further extend our model in the bright and dark side. So how these two sides of the ecosystem are continuing to evolve. So here on the right, you can see different clusters of the big topics to a certain degree across time that characterized financial services in terms of technologies mainly and actors. And what strikes us at first, of course, of the financial services ecosystem is that we're talking about a highly regulated market. We have the NICs, the CNIS, the SOX, the PCI, and the SS for cards, the BSA, that delimit a perimeter of action for those who follow the rules to a certain degree, right? For those actors who use who seek the appropriation of value instead of the misappropriation of values. And we do have some structural challenges which are consequences of this evolution and these trends shown on the right. So a massive surge in endpoints in the all sectors with potentially more entry points for malicious actors. Multi-cloud network environments, which brings a plethora of new issues to deal with. Increasing reliance of third-party vendors. And also an increased customer orientation, which brings to the development of apps, customized service, which in turn require web servers and so on, which are potentially, again, other endpoints that could be exploited by dark actors. As far as trends in the dark side goes, instead, we see from very recent reports. Yeah, sure. We see that cybercrime is evolving swiftly to meet this regulation and new security sort of infrastructure protocols. They mostly use highly automated process to maximize the number of attacks, and they're kind of surging. It's particularly recent here. As you can see from the second bullet point, we drawn evidence from several reports of CTI's platforms and security specialized actors and vendors that for 15 years in a row, the financial service ecosystem is being the most attacked among the top 10 sectors, economic sectors that are usually monitored by these systems. So 23% of the attacks directed to this ecosystem. In Italy, according to the Clusit report, is slightly lower to a certain degree, but this is also due to the nature of data, since this 8% refers to attacks that had a severe consequences, whereby here we have the attack detected. With the most common malware being those I listed here. I don't have time to go through them, unfortunately, but we can you can look them up. And the most common type of attack is the server access attacks from the sort of the dark side. Surprisingly, the amount of ransomware that targeted the financial service ecosystem is quite low as compared to other sectors, and is most likely due to the fact that other sectors provide cyber criminals with stronger incentive to target them, such as less security controls and less tolerance towards downtime. And yet, just this to kind of conclude before jumping to the conclusion, being target of attacks is not just a problem of the bright side, really. In March 2021, 4 of the main hackers from Russia were suffered severe data breaches, which raised well-known concerns that are something that we may label as typical of the bright side of the ecosystem. And of course, a bunch of problems stems from that. The attribution, data-related concern, and here I included some of the posts and an exemplifying text from one of these forums. So to conclude, our project aimed to provide a theoretical contribution to clarify what is the role of SecOps in digital service ecosystem formation and evolution. Ideally, creating a process model to create out this threefold configuration of factors co-evolve in the bright and dark side of the ecosystems, eventually leading to a theory of conflict in cyber ecosystem between competing actors. We aim to enrich that with further theoretical support, so expanding our secondary sources to expand the 5-step model of institutional forms, press releases and so on, and in interviews for the bright side, whereas hacking forums, reports and so on from the dark side, as well as you might have seen, some data from on TTPs from CTI's platform and so on. Ideally, that will bring practical indications as well, such as the insights on the return of investment on SecOps spending, because it's our hypothesis that innovation is partially driven by security, right? By the interaction with a warring between the warring parties, then security as an asset instead of security as a liability could definitely this sort of statement could definitely be reinforced. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Andrea, for your presentation. I don't know if is there any question from the attendees? Any question? No? Okay. Then we have 1 minute maybe, and then we can discuss about your paper, Andrea, and the other authors. Then my impression is that this paper is very important because with your paper, you propose empirical based research, and then this is a great contribution or contribute to the knowledge. And then this is my compliment about your empirical evaluation of a specific case study, and just a few advices or maybe recommendations. Then the first one is that at theoretical level, maybe you can include a theoretical conceptual framework about public and private partnership. What public-private partnership means.
Luigi, scusami, sono Gianluca Roascio, siete qui dalla regia. Noi dobbiamo assolutamente switchare a un'altra cosa, quindi ti lasciamo l'host a te, poi concludi tu il meeting, va bene?
Ok, ottimo, grazie.
Ricorda per favore soltanto di spegnere la registrazione prima di lasciare. Grazie mille, è lì sotto.
Vabbè, sì.
C'è scritto record lì sotto, clicchi lì e si chiude.
Ok.
Grazie mille, caro. Ciao.
Grazie, ciao. Okay, just sorry about technical issues, but it's okay. Then this is my suggestion. The first suggestion is to include a specific conceptual and theoretical framework about public-private partnership in general, and in particular in your case study. And then this is the first. The second one is about, for instance, an conceptual and empirical analysis of the two concepts, the legal and criminal, legal versus crime concept. What do you mean? And then how it's possible to have boundaries between criminal groups and state actors, for instance, in this context, and what are the main consequences of these differences, etc. And then the last point is who is in charge in case of a cyber criminal act against a financial system to react, for instance. And then these are my just suggestions, but my compliment for your paper, because I appreciated your paper, your empirical approach. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have remarks. The microphone is yours, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments and feedback. Actually, yeah, particularly the last point you mentioned on who's in charge in the dark side, so to say. So how does the structure of the institutional forms work to a certain degree? It's something that should be more explicit to a certain degree. So I definitely take your point, and I would reflect upon that and convey that to my co-authors, because again, there are some structural differences between the more typically institutional sort of configuration of the bright actor, if we want to call it this way, and the more diluted and transnational even structure of the dark side to a certain degree. So we definitely need to explicitate that. Thank you for your comments.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. I don't know if you have any comments from the attendees, but please switch on your microphone if you want to intervene, not only about the Andrea's paper, but about the special track, which is an experiment in ITASEC. And then I think that we accomplished our mission, because for the first time we had this opportunity, and then I think that we have the opportunity to replicate the special track also for the next year, I hope in presence. But feel free to switch on your microphone if you want to say something. No? Okay, maybe we can finish our section here. Let me to thank all the paper givers, Andrea, Alessia, Anna, Didier, Lior, and Marzio, for your presentation. I hope that I listed all the paper givers that are here. And then thank you very much for your impressive research, for your contribution to the knowledge, and then in particular for your contribution to stress the relevance to address also the policy-oriented issues of cybersecurity. Then we don't have only technical issue, but also policy, legal, and economic-oriented issue. And then thank you so much for your contribution. I hope to see you again and to cooperate with you again as soon as possible. And my really compliment for your achievement, because I think that you have the opportunity to contribute also for the proceedings of this special track. And then thank you again, and on behalf of the ITASEC and the National Cybersecurity Laboratory. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Goodbye.